On paper, this has the opportunity to definitely win Fight of the Night honors. In our main event, we have Max Holloway blessed taking on the Boston finisher Calvin Kattar. And how could you not be excited for this fight at featherweight? You have two primary strikers, two of the best pure boxers in MMA, in Holloway and in Kattar. And Matt, for Calvin Kattar in his last 5 fights, the one loss is to Zabit Magomed in a weird fight that, under normal circumstances, should have been 5 rounds. It was only 3. Zabit ran away with the first 2. In the third, though, Calvin Kattar started to gain some ground. And a lot of people, of the mindset that if that fight was 5 rounds, Kattar would have won, but we'll never know. So if you look at the 2 wins before that, we've got Chris Fishgold back UFC Moncton in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. The win over Ricardo Lamas where he finishes him. You look at the win over Jeremy Stevens, it's a finish there. And then a decision win over Dan Ige where Calvin Kattar took that fight over pillar to post. And for Dan Ige, there were some question marks going into that one. Did he really win the Barboza fight? But wow, did Calvin Kattar ever look good in that one against Dan Ige? And if you look at it for Max Holloway, his last 5, bit of a mixed bag. He beats the brakes off of Brian Ortega a couple years ago, UFC 231 in the main event. Just absolutely puts him to shame. He's toying around with his lead hand, just absolutely beating him all fight long. Then he fights at 155 pounds for the interim lightweight strap against Dustin Poirier. And if you go look at the stats on that fight, don't actually watch it, you just go off of stats, Max Holloway's striking stats are pretty good, but he definitely didn't win that fight. Dustin Poirier with the more damaging shots in that one ultimately booked his ticket at UFC 242 to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. So Holloway goes back down to 145 pounds. Fights Frankie Edgar in a fight that really shouldn't have happened. It was supposed to be Ortega and then Edgar, and then it bounced back and forth here and there. And off of, Frankie Edgar gets that shot. So it happens. It was a fight. And Frankie Edgar didn't win it. And then you have the 2 fights that Holloway lost against Volkanovski. Now, Matt, the first fight, was it as close as the second fight? I don't really think so. The second fight, again, Luke Thomas had to watch it 49 times. I don't care what you think of it. Max Holloway didn't win it on paper, so here he's fighting Calvin Kattar. Do you think that if Holloway wins this one, he gets another shot at Volkanovski's gold?
I have no idea. That's really the only answer I can give you. Because I don't know if Max Holloway thinks he's going to be champ at 145 next or 155 next. Because when you look at the lightweight division, the worst guy stylistically for him was Khabib Nurmagomedov, and now that guy's no longer in the division. So you look at who else is really good at 155. Well, he had a really good fight with Dustin Poirier. Yes, he lost, but it was still a competitive fight. So if you can have a competitive fight with Poirier, you're right in there in the mix with the top 5 of the lightweight division. So I do think it comes down to what does Max want to do with the rest of his career. He's lost twice to Volkanovski. I know even Dana White thinks he had won the second one. Okay, just for full transparency, I love Max Holloway. He's in that echelon of my favorite fighters of all time. I thought he lost the first Volkanovski fight. I did think he won the second one. Now, the second fight was very close, but I really thought he won the first 3 rounds quite easily, and then he lost the second 2, which were pretty close, but neither here nor there. Just my mindset going into this one. Max Holloway has beaten fighters way better than Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar, this is the first time he's ever going to fight an elite guy at 145, and the UFC is not really doing him any favors by giving him the former champ, because Max Holloway, who does he struggle with? Well, he struggles with guys who can take away his legs and his movement, like Volkanovski was able to do, especially in their first fight. I'll talk a little bit about the second fight, but in the first fight, Volkanovski did a great job of just shutting down the game of Holloway, not giving him all those options and all the different striking kind of sequences that he likes to go throughout a fight, whereas Calvin Kattar, the fighter who forced him to change the most during a fight was probably Shane Burgos. How Burgos was able to sort of match him with the boxing, match him with the output, to the point where Calvin Kattar had to rely on those power shots later on in the fight. Max Holloway's never struggled with a guy like Calvin Kattar. And you can say, oh, well, Calvin Kattar fights kind of like Poirier. The power difference between those two is quite remarkable. And Max Holloway, the only fighter to ever absorb over 900 strikes to the head and not get knocked down in a fight. I don't know if that's a record you want to be known for, or maybe not. It's just a very impressive fact. When you look at how Max Holloway fights, you would assume, okay, a guy who goes in there, doesn't really give much regard for his own health, and is a primary striker, well, he must get clipped every now and then. Not really. And even when he does, he reacts really well to it. Now, Poirier was probably the only guy who was able to really rock him in a fight. We've never seen Holloway get tagged and get hurt like that before. I don't think Calvin Kattar will have that same effect on Holloway. I think we'll be able to set up some of those shots like Poirier was able to. And if Kattar is able to start planting his feet and throwing in combination, he'll have success. The issue is, if you're planting your feet to try to throw with power to beat Holloway, because I think that's the only way he can beat Holloway, he's just going to be able to move his feet constantly and circle around you. And Max Holloway does something very similar. You see a lot more in boxing than you do in MMA. Where in boxing, I'm going to land my combinations, then I'm going to try to get to your back. Because if I'm on your back constantly, you can't throw punches at me. You look at a guy like Lomachenko is the obvious choice, of course, but Lomachenko would throw his combination and then shift around behind you and always kind of get behind your hip. Max Holloway does a very similar thing only in MMA where he'll throw his combination and he kind of darts to either the left or the right. And here's the great thing about Holloway. He can do that from either the southpaw or the orthodox position. It's not like with a Wonder Boy where when he's fighting orthodox, he'll throw certain, strikes and combinations at you. Then when he's fighting southpaw, he'll just fight with a different style. With Holloway, he can mirror himself perfectly from either stance, and that's something that's very rare in MMA.
He's very much MMA's Pat Vendetti, to make a weird MLB reference. He's a very good ambidextrous fighter, and you definitely see that
Mickey
in a lot
Mantle
of his
is who I was gonna say.
performances, all right? Pat Vendetti, former Toronto Blue Jay. Great. Now, with Calvin Kattar, you know exactly how crystal boxing is. And the Shane Burgos example is probably the best one at UFC 220. And watching it from the nosebleeds at TD Garden, I just had the opportunity to see, just how technical Calvin Kattar can be. And I think that fight really opened him up to a bigger audience. I know, if you're a fan of, fighting in New England, the fact that he owns Combat Zone, the promotion in New Hampshire, and he markets those fights and pushes them, he's definitely a student of the game, and we've just seen a good progression in that overall game. And again, a lot of people like to point to the fact that the New England cartel, they're really taking over. Manager Tyson Chartier, whether he's coach, manager, what have you, really puts together a good team with a good skill set. Now to Lausanne's MMA, we've seen not just Joe, but Calvin Kattar and very recently Rob Font putting on really impressive performances. So we've seen Calvin Kattar go from beating a guy like Shane Burgos, who I still hold in very high regard at 145. Even off of that loss and even off of the fight against, I wanted to say Jeremy Stevens, but Josh Emmett, still hold him in high regard. The Chris Fishgold fight was a little weird because, again, we're moving levels here, but the former Cage Warriors champ, a good jiu-jitsu out of Chris Fishgold. The win over Lamas is great. Even though he was, long in the tooth, that's fine. The fight against Zabit, still impressive, even though he lost that one. The one against Jeremy Stevens, holy smokes. And then the last one against Dan Ige.
I don't think it is the one against Jeremy Stevens, holy smokes. Again, there's a lot of negatives from that fight that I think people glossed over just because the knockout itself was so spectacular from Kattar. People forget, he got his nose broken, and that first round, Jeremy Stevens chopped his lead leg up really bad and landed a lot of combinations. And not to take your whole point, but if Jeremy Stevens can land combinations on you, Max Holloway definitely.
You didn't let me finish where I was going to go with it. The fact that you parlay a fight against Jeremy Stevens where you go through adversity and then not long after. So he breaks his nose. And again, 7 months, 3 weeks ago from the day that we're filming this today. A few months later, you go into a fight with Dan Ige. And that's where the question marks come into my mind is, well, again, you broke your nose pretty bad early on in that fight. You absorbed a lot of damage. How's Calvin Kattar going to look in a fight against Dan Ige? Because again, totally different fight styles from Stevens to Ige. From Ige, you're going to expect a lot of takedowns. You're going to expect him to close the gap quite a bit. Well, Calvin Kattar did an excellent job in that fight. Now, we look at Max Holloway, a fighter that has been there and done that for the longest time. Again, this is his 8th main event in a row. You had all of those title fights. What did he really struggle, up against when he had some of those fights? A lot of lateral movement, a lot of Volkanovski darting in and out, side to side, using those leg kicks. He was really tough to try and find and try and hit. Max Holloway, you talked about it. He has fought a lot of fighters that utilize the forward motion that really have to cover distance to get wins. Jose Aldo, Anthony Pettis are probably prime examples. But again, you can go to Lamas, you can go to Stevens. And the Oliveira fight, I wouldn't point to a whole lot just because you've seen so much success more so at 55 than at 45 from Charles Oliveira. So forget about that fight. But Stevens, Lamas, Pettis, and Aldo, those are the ones that I would really try and lump in. Now, Calvin Kattar, the thing that he does very well, it's distance control, it's distance management, and the fact that he doesn't have to crash the pocket to find success. He really doesn't. He can strike from distance incredibly well. So that's what's going to pose a problem for Max Holloway. That's where you're going to probably see success from Kattar if you do see it. I don't see that really happening in this fight, so I want to focus on the Tapology votes and the odds in this one, Matt. 1,184 total votes on Tapology so far. 76% have Holloway, 76% have him to win by decision, 17% have him to win by knockout. If we look at the odds, Holloway is a slight favorite, not a decent favorite, which kind of surprised me. Open to minus 135, now at a minus 170. For Calvin Kattar, open to plus 115 at a plus 135 now. Honestly, and maybe it's just a little bit of the shine of the fact that Holloway had all those title fights, and again, he is 2-3 in his last 5. I'm slightly surprised that Holloway isn't more of a favorite here.
Oh, without a doubt. And just to add one thing to a previous point, a performance I really do think you have to go back and put a lot of stock into is what Max Holloway was able to do against Cub Swanson, because that was his first time fighting an upper echelon guy at 145. Not only did he outbox a primary boxer in Cub Swanson, at the time, I do think Swanson's style is quite similar to Kattar. He throws a lot more kicks, but just the fact that they do throw big looping shots in the feet. Also, Max Holloway might be as good of a boxer as Calvin Kattar. That's the best thing Calvin Kattar does, though. We're not taking into account Max Holloway has a really good kicking game. I know we don't see it a lot, but when we do see him use his kicks, they're always very good. The Ortega fight, he incorporated a few more into, and they were a really key component. And also, he has a great ground game. You just don't see it because his striking is at such a kind of a Hall of Fame level, if you will, whereas Max Holloway, one of the better pound-for-pound strikers really of all time when you look at him at his best. The fact that he can take the fight to the ground, he has a good submission game, I do think is going to cause a lot of issues for Kattar, because Kattar, the thing he does the best at is something Max Holloway also is a specialist in, and that comes down to the boxing. So I think Holloway does Kattar's specialty better than him. And then you look at the rest of his game, you kind of have to lean with Holloway. I agree. Expected Holloway to be more of a favorite going into this because, again, he has more 5-round experience. He has more experience against higher level of competition. And stylistically, this is just a hard fight for Calvin Kattar. He could catch Max Holloway. Again, when you've absorbed that many significant strikes to the head, eventually that is going to catch up to you. But I do think Holloway's still going to be able to get this one done.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this fight. And if we have a look at the card as a whole, we talked about this one as being a possible fight of the night option, but there's so many great fights out there. The co-main event, Carlos Condit, Matt Brown, that's a great one. Ponzinibbio's return against Li Jingliang. We have Joaquin Buckley, the viral sensation of 2020. He won our Move of the Year with the Fight Night Picks Awards from 2020. He's taking on Alessio Di Chirico. And you go on down through the list. I mean, Nick Lentz, Mike Grundy. You might, open your newspaper and go, geez, Nick Lentz is fighting Mike Grundy. On to the next page. But that should be a really good fight. Two great wrestlers. I mean, Division I wrestling out of Nick Lentz, the freestyle Commonwealth champ out of Mike Grundy, and so on and so forth. It is a really good card. And Matt, it pains me to try and say this, but we always used to do, and we do it on Fight Night Picks !Kicks, which is an hour, possibly 2 hours before our total event. We do it before the prelims. We get our last picks. Sometimes weight cuts don't go well for some people. Sometimes you hear weird rumblings during the week. But if we give this card a letter grade, Matt, and I'm going to go first here, this is an easy B+ with a lot of upside for me.
Compared to how you were feeling before we started this, I think this is a B, honestly. I think the main event really puts it over the edge because this is an A+ main event between Calvin Kattar and Max Holloway. This is the easiest grade I'm going to be able to give. You have two guys, always put on fun fights to begin with. Now you're matching them up with each other in a 5-round atmosphere. That fight is going to deliver. Look at the rest of the card. Again, if you're a hardcore, you guys are watching us, so congrats. There's a lot of really great fights. I'm really excited for the return of Ponzinibbio. I'd love to see him come back and just at least be like 97% of what he used to be. The Imavov Phil Hawes fight, excited for that one. There's just a lot of good fights on this card that excitement-wise should be able to deliver.
Really looking forward to it, Matt. And in our main event, we both have Max Holloway to pick up the win. Overall, a great card. If you missed any of the prediction videos, the previews, make sure you go back in and check them out. And with Fight Night Picks, we're always coming out with new and different contests. So let us know what you think of the videos. We have early stoppage. We have This Week in MMA. We have Revisionist MMA. All sorts of great stuff out there. And you can also follow on FightNightPicks.com over on the website with features and articles by our own Josh Hart, really looking at making moves and starting grooves over there. So Matt, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.